If doom scrolling were just bad habits, you could stop by now, but you haven't. And that's not because you're weak, distracted, or addicted to your phone. It's because your brain is doing exactly what it was trained to do. In this video, I'm going to show you something uncomfortable, but also strangely relieving. Doom scrolling isn't a failure of self-control. It's the result of a series of discoveries about the brain made decades ago that quietly changed how behavior works. Once you understand these discoveries, three things will suddenly make sense. Why scrolling doesn't feel fun, but you keep going. Why stopping feels harder than continuing. And why just use willpower has never worked. This isn't a story about phones. It's a story about how the brain decides when it's safe to stop and what happens when that signal disappears. Your brain doesn't constantly decide what to do next. Most behavior is handled automatically by systems built for speed, efficiency, and repetition. In neuroscience, this is called model-free control, or habit formation. It's driven largely by the basal ganglia, especially a structure called the dorsal striatum. This system doesn't ask why. It doesn't simulate the future. It simply repeats what worked last time. And that's how habits form. And that's how scrolling can start happening without choosing. But the brain has a second system, a slower one. This system evaluates outcomes, compares behavior to goals, and decides when it's time to stop. Neuroscientists call this model-based control. It relies on a network that includes the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, which holds goals in mind, the orbital frontal cortex, which evaluates value, and the anterior cingulate cortex, which detects conflict and applies brakes. This system is flexible, reflective, and expensive, so the brain only hands back control to it when it receives a very specific signal: completion, an ending. No ending means no handover. No handover means no decision. Control stays with the habit system, and I want you to hold on to that, because everything that follows depends on which system is in charge and how easily control can switch back. The story starts in a psychology lab. In the 1930s, B.F. Skinner was trying to answer a simple question: what makes behavior keep going? So he built what became known as the Skinner box. Inside was a pigeon. On the wall was a small lever. When the pigeon pecked the lever, food appeared. At first, Skinner made the system predictable. Every peck produced food. The pigeon learned quickly, and once it was full, it stopped. So Skinner changed one thing. Now food appeared sometimes. No pattern and no signal. What happened next surprised him. The pigeon pecked more. Not because it was hungry, but because it couldn't work out when stopping was safe. Skinner called this variable ratio reinforcement. The strongest behavior didn't come from the frequent reward, it came from the uncertain reward. So here's the simple version. When outcomes are predictable, your brain learns the pattern and moves on. When outcomes are unpredictable, your brain keeps checking, not for pleasure, but for certainty. If the brain can't tell whether stopping is a mistake, it doesn't stop. This is the first crack in self-control. Behavior stops feeling chosen and starts feeling ongoing. Decades later, casinos took Skinner's discovery seriously. They didn't just build games of chance, they engineered systems of time on machine. Early slot machines paid out too regularly. Players would win, feel finished, and leave. So casinos changed the math. Winnings became variable, not just rare, but unpredictable. Small wins were mixed with losses. Near misses were designed to feel like progress. Crucially, payouts were no longer designed to make players rich. They were designed to keep players playing. Casinos don't measure success in jackpots. They measure it in minutes. The longer someone stayed on the machine, the more money the system extracted. Psychologists watching gamblers noticed something strange. People didn't look excited. They didn't look happy. They looked absent. Time awareness faded, self-reflection disappeared, and movements became automatic. This state became known as the machine zone. Casinos didn't optimize for winning. They optimized for time without stopping. For years, scientists thought dopamine caused pleasure. Then in 1997, Wolfram Schultz showed this wasn't true. Schultz recorded dopamine activity in animals during reward learning. At first, dopamine fired when the reward arrived. But once the pattern was learned, dopamine stopped firing at the reward. It fired at the uncertainty. When something unexpected happened, when something might happen, dopamine wasn't saying this feels good, it was saying pay attention, don't stop yet. Suddenly Skinner's pigeons made sense, and so did gamblers. Now take that exact system and shrink it until it fits in your hand. Each scroll becomes a lever pull, each post becomes a possible outcome. Most posts are neutral, some are mildly interesting. A few stand out just enough to keep the question open, just like a slot machine. But social media adds one critical upgrade. Casinos still have limits. You have to stand up, you have to walk away. The machine eventually forces a pause. Your phone doesn't. The feed never ends. No bottom, no finish line, no moment where the brain hears the word done. The same logic that kept gamblers glued to machines now runs continuously in your pocket. That's why Tristan Harris described the smartphone as Vegas in your pocket, because the system isn't trying to entertain you, it's trying to keep you inside the loop. And just like in a casino, the longer you stay, the more the system wins. At this point, people usually ask a very reasonable question. If this isn't enjoyable, why do I keep doing it? The answer comes from a discovery in neuroscience that sounds subtle but changes everything. In the late 90s, Kent Berridge showed that the brain uses different chemical systems for wanting and enjoyment. They're not the same thing. The urge to check, refresh, or keep scrolling is driven largely by dopamine. Dopamine doesn't create pleasure, it creates pull. It says, this might matter. Check again. Don't stop yet. Enjoyment, the feeling of liking something, comes from different systems. Actual pleasure depends on opioid and endocannabinoid signaling in the brain. These systems are responsible for satisfaction, fullness, and the sense that something was enough. And here's the crucial part. These systems adapt at different speeds, under constant uncertainty. Dopamine becomes sensitized, opioid and endocannabinoid responses habituate. So the urge grows stronger while enjoyment fades. This creates a very specific experience. Scrolling stops feeling fun, but stopping feels worse. Not because scrolling is rewarding, but because the brain is flooded with check again signals. And while the systems that say that was enough have gone quiet, this is why doom scrolling feels flat. Not exciting, not relaxing, just ongoing. And it's why just stop feels like terrible advice. You're not fighting pleasure, you're fighting a chemical mismatch between a sensitized dopamine system and fatigued pleasure systems that can no longer close the loop. Normally, stopping feels obvious, but under constant uncertainty, the brain's stopping signal weakens. Stopping feels like relief. It starts to feel like effort, not because you lack discipline, but because the signal to stop never arrives cleanly. You're not pushing against desire, you're pushing against momentum. This is where the loop fully closes. Neuroscientist George Cobb studied what happens when reward systems are activated time and time again. He found that the brain always tries to balance itself. Repeated stimulation triggers a counter system, one that produces stress and discomfort. At that point, behavior changes. You're no longer scrolling to feel good, you're scrolling to avoid feeling worse. Stopping creates unease, scrolling returns things to neutral. So the brain chooses neutral again and again. Doom scrolling isn't a moral failure. It's the predictable outcome of systems built using everything science learned about how hard it is for the brain to stop without closure. Your brain isn't broken, it's responding exactly as these discoveries say it will. The solution isn't more willpower, it's structure, endings, boundaries, pauses. Because attention isn't something you spend, it's something your brain organizes itself around. And the longer that organization belongs to a social media feed, the harder it becomes to take it back.